Welcome back to another episode of the Plutus Awards podcast. I'm your host, Chris Browning, and I'm thrilled to be joining you all here again. Our community is filled with hundreds of stories from creators and entrepreneurs just like you. And through this podcast, we plan to share these stories, from bloggers to podcasters, writers, speakers, and more. Let's meet today's guest.
Hi, my name is Brynne Conroy. I am the creator of Femme Frugality and the author of the Feminist financial handbook. I've been writing about personal finance for almost 9 years now. And I started and I continue doing this because I want to help people with their lives, and money is a pretty powerful medium to do that.
So we ended season 1 with a conversation about why representation matters. And we had 3 really great guests on, Jamila Souffrant, Berna Anat, Bethany Bayless, and they spoke about why it was so important to them to see women and to see people who look like them doing this whole life of managing your money and being great at what you do. And it was so impactful for them to actually see that. Brynne, has this been the case for you? Has seeing people who look like you, seeing women who are handling their money, has that been impactful too?
Yeah, definitely. It has been. And those 3 women that you talked about, I really enjoyed that conversation, and I learn a lot from them every time they put out a new piece of content. It's a little bit awkward to be in this situation. I am a white woman, white cis woman. So I can say that undoubtedly I've learned a lot from all of the people around me. But I don't want to sit here and pretend that I am some type of representation for anybody. What I prefer to do with my work when possible and when I can, I'm actually super not comfortable promoting myself and my own story. What I like to do is I like to invite other people in when possible and hear from them and get their firsthand accounts and learn what the problems are at all of those different intersections of oppression. Because I feel like if we address some of the hardest, most complex problems for people, then things are naturally going to get easier for everybody else. That's kind of what I try to do with my work, and representation is crazy important. And especially in the personal finance space, I feel like it's such a male-dominated space. Even though we've got at least 50% of the people in our own community being female, it's gotten so much better in the past few years. But for a long time, we weren't seeing gender parity in representation. We weren't seeing women featured as often or picked up as often by major outlets or getting as many speaking gigs. But again, within the past few years, I think that awareness has kind of changed, and there's been a little shift, and hopefully that shift will stick. I know that this kind of happens. This is like a cyclical thing, right? People become aware and then they forget and then they become aware again. I hope that things continue to get better with this trend of seeing more representation.
Yeah, me too. I think there are so many amazing voices out there that aren't heard, and really for no good reason. There's no reason why they shouldn't be a part of the conversation, but the way the system's been set up, that's just how it is. People get excluded from the conversation. So I really hope we get to hear from more amazing voices like yourself and all the other amazing people in the community who have really great things to say. You started your journey with writing you were living in poverty, and you decided to start your blog. And at this point in time now, where we are now, Femme Frugality has been nominated for a Plutus Award. You've been a finalist for a Plutus Award multiple times. But back then, you just wanted to share your journey. And so what made you turn to a blog to share what's going on with you and what you were dealing with?
I started blogging in 2011. Like you said, I was living below the poverty line. I had recently found out that I was expecting, and I live in a city where we're super saturated with college degrees. We have like a bajillion colleges in our area. So even for jobs like that in other areas, you might be able to get with a 2-year or a GED, because there are so many qualified people around. Companies can seek out those with higher degrees. So I found myself in a position where I didn't have an adequate education. I had refused to take on student loan debt, probably a little bit obstinately and naively, because I just didn't want to live with that burden. I didn't see that big of an ROI on a degree. But when I found out I was expecting, I found out that there were all of these grants and scholarships available to me that actually made school not only free, but I could pocket some of that money too. And so I was doing that. I was finding other ways to, I guess, quote unquote, side hustle, but they were more like survival mechanisms like selling stuff around my house, going in for like medical studies and everything, mystery shopping, all of that stuff. And simultaneously recognizing different welfare programs that I qualified for. I was really reticent to apply for those even when I needed them. But when I found out I was expecting, it made me see pretty quickly how irresponsible I was being. When I did find out there was a kid involved, I was like, okay, I need to get food. I need to get money to pay the electric. I'm working 40 hours a week, but I'm not making enough money to keep things going. And so I very quickly found a lot of ways to make things better. And my friends got sick of hearing it once I started getting into tax code. So
I wonder why.
I wonder why I'm that friend. So I started putting it on the internet because I thought, like maybe other people will benefit from this, because this is a whole lot of stuff that I didn't know existed before I absolutely had to figure it out.
That's hilarious that you said that. Like, I've heard the story multiple times. We had past guest Allison Baggerly from Inspired Budget. She also mentioned that she got so into talking about personal finance that her friends and family were like, please stop talking to us about this. we do not want to hear about this anymore.
Exactly. I'm like, why would you not want $400 back just for working? This was like still in the Obama stimulus era.
So how did this hobby, this kind of like thing you just decided to do because your friends were like, okay, we've had enough. How did that end up turning into a career?
Well, I found a community. The first one that I found back then was Ukasi. And then a lot of people in that group were also in FinCon. I networked with the people in those communities also here in my own community. And I found that there were people actually making money at it. I didn't make money at it for quite a few years. I was like a full-time student, birthing children, and kept it up as a pretty serious full-time hobby, though. Not full-time work, but like I was at it in all my spare fun time, which is nerdy and weird. But what ended up happening was in 2015, the field that I was in before, I had graduated and started working for a couple of years. The field I was in before, there was a regional work shortage. And so what ended up happening was, as a recent graduate, I was low man on the totem pole and I lost a lot of my work. And I realized that this was not going to be stable during a period of my life when I needed to feed my kids. And so I was in this position where I had studied and prepped for this career that I loved and was really good at. And I had to just pivot. And luckily, I had this business that wasn't pulling in too much money, but I knew that if I put my full-time effort into it, it could. And so at that point, I just switched over and started working full-time on the blog and working with freelance writing clients. And yeah, I've been doing it full-time since.
How has that transition been, going from doing it just for yourself, for fun, for your enjoyment, to doing it as like a career?
Honestly, I was doing a lot of like the back end things that I feel like I needed to be doing before it turned into a career. And then when it did, I was able to, I don't know, I was super lucky, man. I worked really hard at my hobby because I was a nerd. And then it turned out that was something that just happened to be profitable right at the same time I needed it to be. There's a lot of things that I feel like I've worked really hard for in my life. And definitely the prep work made that transition easier. But I would be lying if I didn't say that 80% of it was just me being super fortunate.
Kind of sounds like you were putting in the work, but it was like a right place, right time type of moment.
Yeah, exactly. Like if I hadn't put in the work, there would have been no opportunity. I did put in the work, but like it just happened. I don't know. I feel like that transition might have been too smooth for me. Like I've done a lot of things in my life that are hard. For some reason, that was one of the smoothest. And again, I think it's just because I was willing to put in the work before it was profitable.
So what did that look like for you then? As you're now doing this as your full-time work, what did like a typical day or a typical week look like for you?
Another reason that this is super great for me is right around the same time-ish, one of my children was diagnosed with autism. My typical work day kind of changes depending on that kid's needs. My kids are in school now, which is awesome for them and for me. So I have more set work hours when they're in school. I'm working, but there's still sometimes meetings and stuff, especially with me being East Coast. I have some clients that are Mountain and West Coast time later in the day that I'll catch up with too. But really, it just depends on what the needs are. And then I kind of month to month fill my schedule because there's also different therapies and doctor's appointments and everything. And this is another reason that I feel so fortunate. And I'm hesitant to take too much credit for the ease of that transition, is because it also happened to be a hobby that allowed me to fill a need that I didn't know I had at the time. And that need is just extreme flexibility.
I mean, that's amazing to hear that this opportunity presented itself at a time when you needed it, because I mean, that's not always possible with like a traditional 9 to 5. Now everyone's not as understanding about the life needs that we all have and how they can really mess with your schedule.
I honestly, I don't know that I would be able to continue working like a traditional W-2 job with my individual life circumstances. So it's been just a super huge blessing.
And speaking about life and kind of all the things that are going on, part of what you do in your work is, and I saw this directly on your site, it's helping women earn more, save more, and fight systematic economic oppression. And that's a great mission if I ever heard one. So, so how did this thing that started as a hobby became your career? How did it kind of transition to something with such a big mission?
Part of the shift, I think, happened whenever I did make it a career, because I knew right away that working in a traditional finance space was never one of my life goals. It was actually probably the antithesis of my life goals. I can definitely write articles telling you which credit card is the best, or like how to invest in your taxable investment account, but those things don't help most people. And so I made a pretty conscious decision pretty early on that if I was going to enter this field, I was going to do it on my own terms. And I was going to do it in a way that was consistent with what my previous career goals were, I guess, and kind of bringing some of that cultural mediation and empathy into the money conversation.
I think it's so important, like when especially those of us who are in this space, where we're talking about finance and money, and you can get into some crazy conversations about some high level stuff. But I think it's important to keep in mind that you kind of have to meet people where they are. And a lot of people aren't ready to be able to talking about, futures and stock options. Like that's not most people's daily dealings with money. Most people have a whole other set of concerns and daily things that they're dealing with that, their minds aren't even there to that point yet.
Definitely. And one thing that this is just my personal feeling. I feel like a lot of times we put financial skills on this ladder, right? And if you're at the bottom of the ladder, that's poverty. And if you're at the top of that ladder, that's wealth and security and all of these advanced topics, quote unquote, that come along with it. I don't view it that way. I view it as a very separate and equally intricate set of skills that you need to survive versus skills that you need to build wealth once you already have your basic needs taken care of. Like if you take a Wall Street investor who is used to getting a certain income and used to living a certain lifestyle, and you try to stick them on a welfare program, get them on SNAP, get their kids in Medicaid programs, they are going to have an extremely, extremely difficult time navigating that system. And that's not necessarily a lower level skill. It's just a different skill that you need because of the economic situation that you find yourself in at any current given moment.
Yeah, exactly. It's like people's lives and their situations vary so drastically from person to person. And you have to develop a set of skills that fit where you are in life and what you're dealing with. That's not necessarily transferable. You can't take someone, like you say, you can't take someone from one situation and drop them in another, and they're going to function exactly the same way. They don't know how to survive in that situation.
Right. It's like a spectrum of skills rather than like a ladder, because the same skills that are going to get you get you to build wealth or whatever, once you have money, that's not going to help you get by day to day and put food on the table and get your rent paid and get your electricity paid, which is unfortunately if we're going to be honest, the majority of Americans, the situation that most people find themselves in.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of, I always butcher the name. I think it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs type of situation where it's like, there's like a base level of needs that you have to satisfy. And I think a lot of people, we're trying to just have a safe place to live, have food on the table, and continue to have a job to provide for our family. And that's like the base focus. And so for a lot of people, your attention's so focused on those things. These other things aren't even on your radar at that point. You're just trying to, live life.
Yeah. Or you don't have the resources to take advantage of them, or it's really just a different kind of stress level and skill set.
For you, how did this focus on helping women deal with all these issues that they're dealing with when it comes to dealing with their money and finances? How did that kind of take shape, and what ended up being like the area that you find yourself talking about the most?
Probably initially part of it was looking at myself and my own financial situation. And as it changed and as I started recognizing different intersections in my own life, I started recognizing that there were some areas where you can work and work and work and fight, but that you are very rarely going to be able to be lucky or successful, like we were talking about earlier. And a lot of that is because of the systems that we have in place. For example, like with my kid with disability long term, I may or may not be looking at having a child on SSI for the rest of their life, living in forced poverty, just so that they can get access to their healthcare that they need to survive. And looking at some of these other things that I don't have personal experience with, like if we're talking about homophobia or cisnormativity or racism, all these things that I can't talk about, I'm really, really interested in learning about it. I don't know if it's because of my background in linguistics and anthropology or what it is, but it's something that just seems really important to me. And again, if I'm going to do this work, I want to do work that not only pays me and pays others, but also hopefully impacts the systems that we work in for the better.
I love what you mentioned there about, learning about different people in the situation that they find themselves in. And I think it's so important to always continue to kind of reach out and hear other people's stories, because like for myself, I'm a man. So obviously I don't deal with the day-to-day issues that women deal with. I can't even imagine it. I don't have those experiences. So I always love hearing stories of women and what they deal with, because then it helps me understand directly from them. And that's an experience and understanding I wouldn't have if I just said, whatever, I'm just going to worry about myself. And I'm sure it's not that bad. It's easy to put yourself in that corner and kind of box yourself in and not be open to hearing stories of others and understanding the experiences that people who are not like you deal with.
No, definitely. It's funny because that's something that I used to talk with my kids out about a lot. The word feminism, or like intersectional feminism, it very prominently features the female gender, right? But it's not just about gender. If you're taking an intersectional feminist perspective, you could be looking at all of those different things you were talking about. I would try to tell my ex, like, yeah, you're not a woman, but like that doesn't mean that you haven't faced all of these other forms of oppression throughout your whole life. Like this is about you too. And I think that's something that we all need to remember, is that when something affects one of us, it really affects all of us. And so if we can work on changing those things again for the people who face kind of the most obstacles, we'll actually be removing them for everybody.
Exactly. And back in October of 2018, you published the Feminist Financial Handbook. Tell us a little bit about that and how that plays into the work that you're doing.
That was a really, really fun project. I wasn't initially sure if I wanted to take it on at first because, again, like white cis woman, I was like, I can't tell my story and be honest and authentic about all of these different problems that I haven't faced. So what I decided to do instead was, again, very fortunate to have worked in this community for a really long time. So I knew a lot of women who had faced and overcome these things and who had really important stories. So what I was able to do is I was able to interview them and not only get the stories of the struggle and like what the obstacles are, but also these women are super smart and savvy and have either figured out ways around those obstacles or are still continuing to fight against them, even though it's really difficult. And so I was super honored that they were so open and honest and willing to share. And that's what the book is. It's a collection of their stories and hopefully some tips that can help others work their way through some similar situations. And also, just like you were saying, you get to read the perspective of women that maybe you haven't heard before. You get to learn about disableism. You get to learn about what the different effects of poverty are on people long term. And so getting those perspectives, even if it doesn't necessarily apply to you one-on-one every chapter.
Is there a story that stands out to you from the book that you could tell us a little bit about?
Oh, man, this is so hard. All of them were just really powerful and just really amazing women. I've been reading a little bit by Heather the past couple days, though, so I'll just speak to her because she's the freshest on my mind. Heather is a disabled woman. She has a physical disability, and she actually does a lot of advocacy work. She's a phenomenal writer, and she talks a lot about the inherent punishment that America puts on its disabled people. And a lot of that punishment is financial. She continues to live off of a lot of these programs because, again, you don't have a choice. In her state, if you want access to Medicaid and you're disabled, you make under X amount of dollars. You aren't allowed to go and work for more. or you lose access to that health insurance that's going to cover what you need to get by day to day. She also was a caretaker for her father, who unfortunately, I believe he passed away since the book was published, who had an invisible disability. Her story kind of crossed a lot of lines for me and really just opened up a whole new world, not necessarily a happy world, but like a whole new world of people operating within the financial systems in which they're allotted.
Wow. I mean, and this is something that I know for me and for probably a lot of people listening, like you'd have no idea about these situations. And I think that's why it's so powerful to have things like the Feminist Financial Handbook that are putting these stories out there so we can all understand what so many people are dealing with. It's just, you wouldn't know. You just would not cross the paths in your lives and you'd have no idea that people are dealing with these things on a daily basis.
Yeah, definitely.
Brynne, thank you so much for being so open with your story and kind of sharing what's going on and letting us learn a little bit more about you. So if people want to reach out to you, maybe check out your book, or maybe just come by and say hi, what's the best place for them to reach out to you?
The book is on Amazon, the Feminist Financial Handbook. You can just search for it. But me personally, I am on social media at FemFrugality across all the platforms mostly, but that's my handle if I'm on there. And you can also check out my website, femfrugality.com.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. We'll make sure we put that on the show notes so that way people can easily find you and go and connect with you. So thanks so much for the time. Appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Chris.
I appreciate you all coming back and joining us here for another episode. Next week, we will be jumping back into our Plutus Foundation webinar series with special guest Ashley Barnett. So make sure you're subscribed so that way you get that episode and more from the Plutus Awards podcast. You can learn more about our guests and the Plutus Awards podcast at plutusawards.com/podcast and on Instagram at Plutus Awards. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and remember to keep creating.